am exalted! On wings of fire, hope ascends!
At the height of the Rune Wars, death and destruction was brought upon everyone and everywhere, and thus, people heeded calls of justice. Two Targonian lovers, Kayle and Mihira, went to Targon's Peak to seek help and protection. Mihira, while bearing twins, was then blessed to be a vessel of the aspect of justice. A starfire spellblade, dubbed Virtue, and wings were bestowed upon, and beneath the vault of stars, twins were born, one in the light and one in the shadows. As Mihira's dedication to her duty grew brighter, her humanity would become overshadowed. Kayle feared her wife no longer exists, and as her light draws more enemies to them, he fled with her daughters, sailing to a settlement far away where magic is mitigated, and that place would soon be known as Demacia. Chaos slowly withers away, thus mortal cycles begin anew. As the twins grew, their clashing personalities were made known. Morgana empathized with the newly arrived refugees, while Kayle argued to implement laws on the settlement to protect the people and keep everyone safe from one another. Her father watched and grew weary of their resemblance to their mother. When order is needed the most, a sword of light and shackles of darkness fell from the sky. The blade was split in half, and her mother's echo of justice called the scale took half of the blade. Made known that there can only be one aspect, Morgana took the other half with a veil of grief on the possibility of their mother's demise. As wings of gold and jet grew, they soared high. Kayle's light sees all, and swore to purge the evil with holy fire. Thou shalt end these mortal cycles to keep order, and for thy sins to be committed no longer. As the light burns brighter, the darkest shadows it casts. Morgana too fought for Demacia's cause, but in her eyes, crops of wickedness can still be harvested, for in them lie seeds, and for thy water we bless them, make crops of goodness grow. As time went on, their settlement was under attack, while in battlefront, Morgana saw a secret force headed to the city. Kayle alone with her comrades defended, while Morgana fled in aid of the citizens. Safety was bestowed upon the protected, but for the price of bloodshed to the protectors. Kayle, torn and bloody, realized that her sister only cared for the people, thus trust was broken, and on that day, they were dubbed the Winged Protectors of Demacia. The twin aspects found themselves standing over a sea of dead demacian soldiers over their walls. They looked up and saw the sky beyond the clouds were blood red. They soared above to investigate, and there they met in combat. Aatrox found himself in Demacia to recover the darkened ages which inside his comrade Jural was sealed. They could not match Aatrox in physical battle and were thrown to the ground. Morgana then set aside her sword and with all her strength cast shackles to lock the world ender in place. Kayle took Morgana's blade. She glanced at her with disgrace, but with recognition of her plan. She then focused all her might and executed Aatrox and his legions with righteous flames. This was then sealed inside the darkened blade. Soon after, Kayle founded a Judicator Order to enforce the law and hunted down rebels and raiders, raining down judgment over them, with one left kneeling for mercy. As her sword met his demise, a black shield was casted upon him. Her sister begged rehabilitation, and thus pity won her over. Her love for Morgana drowned her followers' call for order, and that would be love's undoing. Kayle allowed Morgana to rehabilitate the wrongdoers, but her highest disciple, Ronus, sees Morgana as the fallen who interferes with law and order, then planned for her death. Yet his own demise was to be paid with shackles of darkness. Kayle, in despair, felt his death, then brought divine fire to punish all the sinners and Ronus' killer. Morgana retaliated and met her blade in the skies. Their swords clashing brought destruction all over the city, and in the distance, her father's screams were heard. Morgana then plunged to the surface and threw her blade aside, embracing Kayle as her sister followed. Morgana cried and cursed her heavenly inheritance. Kayle saw in Morgana's face a reflection of herself, a celestial glory flawed with mortal passion. She too shed tears, took both halves of her mother's sword, and flew to Mount Targon to seek perfect celestial clarity, vowing to never let mortal emotions rule her, thus rejecting it completely. There she stands at her mother's side and fulfill her legacy to the aspect of justice. Even in her absence, Kayle's legend inspired much of Demacia's architecture, culture, and law. In time of strife and chaos, there are many who cling to the hope that Kayle might eventually return. and others who pray that such a day will never come. And the time they dreaded finally came. Centuries later, Zulani was reborn and growing in power. Sensing her rebirth, Aatrox flew across Runeterra once more to rally his darkened comrades to finally kill her. Chaos was upon them, but prayers from the Divine Clerk were heard. Mihira, the aspect of justice, descended along with her legions of winged messengers, seraphic wyverns, and lawkeepers, sending them all over Runeterra to end the madness. Slowly, Darkins went to Shurima to stop the Blood Weaver, but they were no match, for her power and influence grew even stronger. Upon Aatrox's arrival, she had already consumed so much and enslaved most of his comrades. Sensing her mother's presence with the thunderous roars of wyverns, Kayle descended from the heavens. Reminded of the past, she met in combat with Aatrox and demanded information. He then made Kayle aware of his and Zulani's plans. Kayle then calls forth a messenger to seek help from an old friend. As Aatrox transforms into his world-ender form, Ryze arrives. Zulani was then knocked out by his blade and they all focused their attention to stopping Aatrox. Mihira tried to purify Zulani then and there, but the Blood Weaver fought back and consumed her, ascending to her final form, the Aspect's Bane. As Aatrox was fighting back all the enthralled Darkins and Zulani, Kayle heeded Ryze to use the World Runes, for it's their only chance to stop all of this. Ryze then meditated on the history of Runeterra, and ultimately came to a conclusion that Runeterra was worth saving. He then used the World Runes to neutralize everything, and thus Runeterra was saved.
They shall tremble.